Okay, this video is brought to you by the lovely people over at Squarespace who are helping me to continue offering free content and advice. So if you just want to show off your artwork online or start a new business venture, then you can make it with Squarespace. Okay, on today's tutorial I'm going to do a tree in fields and sort of maybe like a sunset type lighting as well. So as usual, I'm using an A4 canvas. It's one of the presets here on Procreate, and I've created a color palette that's down here. The codes for this will be down in the description. If you want to go to the value section, you can type in the codes. You can start to piece together a palette so that you can recreate this with the exact colors. All of my patrons over at Patreon can download this as a file, so they don't need to copy down the codes. If you're interested in taking a look at my Patreon page, there is also a link for that down in the description too. So the brush that I'm going to be using, I use the default settings on these brushes. I don't really change them much at all. In fact, I've not made any changes to these. I will be alternating a little bit between soft, medium, and possibly hard airbrush. I'll probably just stick with the larger set rather than using the smaller set, because even on the larger set, you can turn the size of the brush down. So for me, I like to keep things nice and simple. I'm probably going to be using the soft airbrush and the medium airbrush most of the time. I call it the medium and soft airbrush. Technically, that's what they're called up there, but it is within the airbrushing section of brushes. So I'm using the large soft brush and the large medium brush. So on an A4 canvas, I'm going to start with the first color I've got on my palette, which is the darkest blue I'm going to use. I'm going to use a soft airbrush. I'm going to turn the size of the brush up. I'm going to keep the opacity low to begin with, and I'm just going to start filling in the top of my canvas. I might turn the opacity up quite a bit more actually. I don't really want a lot of this blue. This is, like I say, the darkest blue that's going to appear only at the very top, and I'm very quickly going to move to the next blue along. I'm going to reduce the opacity slightly, turn the size of that brush up. I just want them to blend together. Now, if I'm not too happy with the brush marks and I don't want to spend ages blending them together and really being frustrated with that process, then you can go to the adjustments, Gaussian blur, and just move that along a little bit, and it will blend them in a little bit more for you. Just need to blend in that bottom section as well. If you decide that you've extended too far down, it's easy enough to fix. You just go onto the transform tool in Procreate and just squish it up a little bit more. I can then go to my next color. I'm staying on the same layer for this. I'm going to have quite a few have quite a few more layers with different elements on it. But I think just for this general background sky layer, I'm just going to try and keep it all in one layer. So I've got a mixture of the amount of pressure that I'm adding using the Apple Pencil, because obviously it is pressure sensitive, and on a relatively low opacity. So it's just helping with the blending a little bit more. Okay, I'm going to go along to the next color. And I've got it going from cold, and then it's going quite pale, and now I'm going to have it start to warm up a little bit more as we get closer to the horizon. So I'm trying to run them into each other a little bit more. Again, I can always use the blur tool at the end of this if I want to make the softening sort of transitions a bit more gentle and gradual. So I'm picking my horizon point here with a slightly more distinct yellowy color. Maybe keep some of the strongest colors off towards the edges. I'm going to have the light source somewhere in the middle, so maybe therefore it's a bit lighter in the center region. Okay, I feel like I'm accidentally left a bit of a light area there and there, so I'm just going to go back to my colors, use the second of the blues, and maybe just start to go over some of the edge here just to feed it in a bit more. Not too bothered about some of the marks, because like I say, I'm going to go over using the Gaussian blur. Right, I'm going to condense it down just a little bit more into that section. Again, use the blur and just whiz it along a little bit. Not too much. If I go too much, it'll totally disintegrate the image. I just want to soften it a little bit. Okay, I'm going to add quite a lot more yellow into the scene at the bottom here. I think there's just not enough warmth and colour, so I'm going to add quite a lot more yellow into it. This bottom section is going to be the land. You're not going to see this yellow. Just easier to get rid of it. Then you can really concentrate on the effect that you're creating in the sky. So in fact, I'll just fill in all this area, get rid of the white. The white I always find a bit of a distraction. So I've got a lot more warmth into the scene now. I'm going to use the colour just before the yellow, and I'm going to use it just to start bringing in some features in the sky, some extra sort of cloud banks maybe. And I've got another colour the other side of the yellow as well, and I can also use that. It's a slightly richer orange, I can use that as well. I'm going to go back to my yellow. It's getting the balance right sometimes. You know, you need to just swap backwards and forwards a little bit with the colours until you're happy with the effect of finding that there's not enough yellow in here, so I'm going back over it. I think I want to bring more of that yellow into the sky. Sometimes you can't tell until it's down on canvas what's working best. Okay, that's starting to work a bit better, I think. Back onto my orange colour, and I'm going to put in at this point, in fact I'm going to change brush and I'm going to add another layer because I'm going to start creating a sense of land now at this point. So back onto my brushes, I'm going to use a medium brush this time, onto my colour palettes. I am going to use some of the colours up here initially because I'm dealing with a point in the landscape where it's difficult to discern between the land and the sky anyway. So that colour there is almost the same as that, but that's just a little bit richer down for the land. So I'm starting with a slightly more subdued version, and I'm just going to start trying to put in the actual horizon. Like I was saying a minute ago, I'm going to get rid of the lighter area. The more I shut down the light at the bottom half of the picture, the more it's going to focus the light effect into this part of the scene. I'm not got it on full opacity, so already it started to build layers into the scene. I think maybe on that horizon line, I'm going to create some blobs, some sense that there may be some very distant trees here. So I'm leaving almost like a gap between the blobs and the land, so maybe we have a heavier, denser kind of canopy of the trees above the land, or maybe a low-lying mist on the land. So there's a slight gap between the blobs and the actual the land itself. So we get a little bit of a sense of a slight element of light coming through there. Again, I'm just shutting down this area at the bottom. Okay, so I'm going to move along my colours. I think I will move over to these colours over here now. I've got a darker orange this time. It's very similar to the colour I've already got down, but it is definitely a richer, darker version of it. Maybe reduce the size of my brush, be a bit more precise now. So I think what I'm doing is I'm having this sense of land, and maybe the trees that I've done over this side are going to be part of this colour, and maybe there's a bank of trees that are more connected to the slightly more opaque, paler version of land in the background. I'm going to move along with my colours. As they go along here, they get slightly more from the orange and they head into the green colours. Now this changing from green, or from orange rather, to green is really one of the strongest elements of the piece that I intend to do here. So I'm just using these to create a bit of a slope coming into the scene. Gives you a sense perhaps of the land itself. Maybe off towards the edge we have less of the light that we're planning to try and get across in the centre there. So I'm going to perhaps darken it up just a little bit more at the edges. And I'm going to move on to the next green as well. And as I come down here, I think if I leave a bit of a gap here, if I show you, so I'm starting the green, I'm leaving a little bit of a pale stripe between it. It gives the sense of maybe a low-lying mist, or the light hitting the top of the next part of the land. You can have that running through. Okay, I'm going to go to my next colour, and I think I want to just have a stripe coming in from the edge there. In fact, I'm going to start adding some trees maybe around this region. Some blobs. I'm not going to get bogged too much into detail at this point, bogged down in detail. I'm just keeping it quite textural, creating effects rather than too fine a sharp detail. Might just even use this slightly darker green to create a sense that maybe there's some darker kind of silhouette of trees slightly further in the distance too. So though I've got orange perhaps in the more distant layers, doesn't mean you can't use some of the the more foreground colours and start to apply them in the back as well. There's definitely a communication backwards and forwards between these colours. Maybe there's some stripes and features that cut through the landscape there a little bit, or the suggestion of them at least anyway. And I might do a section of trees over this side as well. Again, I'm just going to build it up in rough shapes. Okay, I'm going to move along my colours. I've got a darker green here, and I'm going to use that now to fill in some of this area here. It's not on full opacity, like so. And I think at this point I'm going to make the decision to put a tree in here. So I'm going to create another layer for this. I may go back to this layer and add further detail, but I'm going to start a new feature and I'm going to add a tree. I'm going to go to the darkest colour. It is pretty much a pure black, but that doesn't mean that you have to use it as full black straight away. You can build it up by using a lower opacity, and that with a combination of different pencil pressures is going to help. So I'm going to move it over, not quite in the centre, but off to the side somewhat. I'm still on my medium airbrush. Turn the size of the brush down a little bit and just start to build in some tree shapes. I'm not too sure what kind of tree I'm going to do here. I'm just doing a generic kind of tree shape. So when you're drawing tree shapes, branch shapes, it's important to make sure they consistently get thinner as they go up. It's too easy with branch shapes just to get slightly lost in the forms, and you end up with getting thinner in some areas and then branches that come off it that will end up being too thick. You need to keep it consistently getting thinner as it goes higher and higher, or further on the branch really. Okay, I'll come back and add some more branches to this shortly, but I'm going to create another layer for this effect. In case I do it wrong, I want to keep the basic structure of the tree intact, but I'm going to start adding some foliage, some leaves. Again, I'm doing this quite randomly as a series of blobs. I don't tend to use brushes for my textural elements. I tend to do them by hand. It's more laborious, but I just prefer being in control of it really. I've not found too many brushes that do the things exactly as I want them, and I like to feel that I've put all the marks on there myself, so I tend to do things more laboriously by hand. But I'm sure some of you have brushes that fit perfectly to this task, so feel free to use those for this kind of element. I could even add some slight branches in the mix here. I'm generally doing just sort of a sense of leaves, but it doesn't mean I can't connect them with some hints of branches as well. I have started a second channel. I decided to keep it separate from this channel because I wanted to do slightly more experimental things, and I realised that some people prefer to come to my channel just for the tutorials, but on the other channel I'm doing more of a collaborative type project in which I provide sketches and I get my subscribers, my viewers, to submit their interpretations, so they work into the drawings that I provide as a download on my Patreon page for free. They work into them, send them back to me, and I feature them in upcoming videos. There is a link for that down in the description as well. Sometimes I even combine people's work together. A sketch that I provide, they work into it, and then the results that they give back to me I then continue to work into, and perhaps even combine it with some of the other submissions that have been given by other people. I'm not quite sure where the channel's going to go yet. It's more of an experimental project, but I'm really enjoying some of the results that people have been sending me, and I think it has a lot of potential to continue to be really interesting, so I'm really excited about it. Okay, that'll do for the essential form of the tree. It doesn't stand up to very close scrutiny. It is generally just to create an effect, but if you want to fine tune, spend longer on your version, then absolutely great, go ahead and do that. I think I'm going to create a separate layer for the next effect. Better if I keep them on separate layers, just in case I make any big mistakes and I feel I need to go back and work back into them. I'm going to use the next color along, the green, and I'm going to use this to start creating some shadows. So it's important I get the right size brush for this. I don't want it to be too thin, but again, I don't want it to be too thick. I need to be able to control it with some accuracy. So I've decided the light source should be about here, so therefore it's going to roughly correspond and create shadows emanating from in the direction. Having said that, the grass or the land that it's going to be casting a shadow on is uneven, so it doesn't matter if it won't form completely straight lines. I've got 3 main trunks and branches here, so I'm creating a slight sense that there's 3 main shadows coming from it as well. Obviously I have other sections here, so maybe they have an effect as well, so we can get a slight sense maybe that it's casting some sense of a shadow here as well, but it's not going to be as distinct as it is there. Likewise, you might get a slight sense that there's a shadow impacting because of that too. But I'm also going to use this brush to start to create more texture generally across the scene here. So again, this is another time-consuming aspect of this piece. I think with all creative things, you've got to be prepared to put the time in. Works of art don't paint themselves, and you've got to really enjoy the process. If you're looking at this and you're thinking, oh, I can't be bothered, then, you know, I'm not sure there's any purpose to doing it to begin with. I enjoyed this stage of a work of art, as long as it doesn't take me weeks. I actually enjoy this kind of fine-tuning, the little textural details. I find most things like this quite good fun. I may be a little strange, but I think you need to be if you're going to be producing artwork for often very little reward other than perhaps a compliment or two. I think you just have to enjoy the process somewhat. So I just want to create the sense that there's little textural qualities in the grass, little sort of hillocks. Obviously, as we get further away, that textural detail is going to be finer. You're not going to get quite as many big forms and shapes. I'm going to move along to the lighter colour here. I've got an orange, and I want some of that warmth to be coming through into the land as well. So I'm going to use that now, and I'm going to find some areas between the dark shapes, and I'm going to start applying some of this orange as well. And the combination of the 3 colours really, because there's a background tone, there's a darker green tone, and now we've got this orange tone coming into the mix. Maybe we have a flattening out in some sections and you get more orange than anything else. Maybe on a section like this you get more orange. And as we get closer, we start to get a break in this texture more. Maybe turn the opacity down and size up. I can create some bigger forms and textures a little bit nearer too. I'm going to move to the black colour. I'm going to turn the opacity down, the size of the brush down a little bit, and I want to just deepen and darken some of these textural elements. When it joins up to the tree, for example, I want it to really take on a similar kind of look and colour and depth of tone as the tree itself. If I decide that in this background area there's bits that I want to make darker, it's easy enough to do that. I've got my selection tool. I'm going to do it freehand, and I'm just going to select an area perhaps that I'm going to make darker. So I'm just drawing around it. Maybe select an area here, like so. I can go to my adjustments, hue, saturation, brightness. I'm just going to turn the brightness down a little bit. Make sure I'm on the correct layer that I want to actually change, which was this one. I wasn't on the correct layer, that's why it was doing strange things. Turn the brightness down a little bit. I think this is going to work a bit better, like so. I think it's a little bit more convincing now. So if you don't get it right to begin with the colours, it's always possible to go back and further adjust things. So in terms of the colour palette, I mean, you know, I create them initially with a sense of what I want to actually create, but you know, you have to be prepared to accept that your initial thoughts, you know, they need changing sometimes. So I had an idea of what colours would work, but then actually on the canvas I realised that really I need darker versions of those colours. So I'm using bigger shapes in the foreground. These little lumps are bigger and darker as they come closer to you. I might take some of that darkness, I might go back to the layer that has the trees on. Now I have made some sections of it darker, and because of that I feel a little bit of a need to make the trees over here a little bit darker as well. They don't need to be anything like as dark as they are on this one, but I think just a touch darker would assist. Bring them together a little bit. They are closer, say for example, than the ones over here. I hope by watching the process and you see how things sometimes evolve like this, that it's useful to see how you can apply that to your own thinking, your own pieces of work, and just be prepared to make the necessary changes. So your initial intentions don't always go to plan, and that's just part of the process. And actually, I think sometimes your best pieces of work can be when you've had to change it. As long as you can acknowledge that you need to change it and you can work with that and not give up, then actually sometimes it can yield really good results. I think I might do some more middle distance trees here, similar to those, maybe just one or two. And obviously, if you've got trees, you might get shadows underneath them too, and an area of land to correspond with the silhouettes. I'm just going to add a bit more texture into this area. I'm going to go back to my front layer actually, although to be honest it doesn't really matter at this point. I've created the general effect. I'm working and fine-tuning into some of the details, but still we'll try and stick to the original layers that we've set out. So I'm using the black rather a lot more than I initially thought I would. I need to be careful though, perhaps I don't want as much black over there, but it's certainly ending up a darker image than I initially thought it would. I'm just going to go back to my colour palette, maybe start to introduce some more of these varieties of colour in there as well. Further breaks up the texture. Maybe the top edge of some of these mounds has a bit more of a highlight to pick up, because we have got a bit that sticks up. It's creating a shadow, therefore it's also likely to catch a bit of a highlight at the top of that form as well. Again, I'm keeping it quite loose, quite textural, quite expressive. I think what I'd like to do is perhaps concentrate on some area here. I'm going to go onto the section where I've got the leaves, and I'm just going to introduce some of that warm colour just subtly into that. In fact, I'm going to turn the size of the opacity down. I'm going to introduce slightly warmer tones in here. I'm going to use a really highlighted area in the background sky there, so I think it would create a slightly warmer effect in the leaves as well. And I'm going to go back to my sky layer. I'm going to go to the white colour, and I'm going to really start to amp up the amount of light that's in this region. Maybe too much. Concentrate it in this area, and I think that if I go back to my branches and my tree area, use the eraser slightly. Maybe it's so strong that it's actually making bits of these branches just kind of disappear into the light there just a little bit. So I'm just going to erase just some small sections of the tree branches, fade them back a little bit so it feels like the light's actually impacting on the tree better there. I may even go back to my slightly more orangey colours, create just, zoom in, some of the leaves on the edge there of the light are maybe going to be a slightly warmer colour. Okay, I'm going to go back to the sky. I'm going to add just a few little wispy kind of details of clouds, things like that. And I'm generally going to move across the piece of work, adding some subtle, smaller details in here sometimes the little details really help sell the image. Nothing too complicated at this point though, I'm just a little bit of refinement, just a hint of wispy clouds coming in here, maybe a few on this side as well. I'll go back to my sky, add perhaps a clearer bank of cloud in there. That's too dark. I'm going to go to my orangey colour instead. Add that into the sky. Instead I might go back and add more detail up there. Go to my slightly darker orange. Maybe have a bit more of that on the edges there. As it gets further away from the sun, maybe it gets slightly darker. Not too much though. I think I'd like to add just a bit more of that yellow, just bringing them together a little bit more in that area. One thing I can also do in this area is, because we've got the sun in the central area there, maybe I need to feed that in so it hits some of the land there a little bit more as well. Okay, just going to spend a small amount of time fiddling with some textures, see where we get. So it could be the leaves in the trees or the texture on the ground. Okay, I'm going to leave this particular piece here for this point. Please make sure to subscribe, there'll be lots more tutorials like this. As I mentioned earlier, this video is brought to you by Squarespace. I wasn't going to get involved in sponsorships from any companies or any organisations that I didn't feel were relevant to my subscribers, but as an artist, as a creative person, then having a website that gives you a way of showcasing your work and potentially selling it is going to be really, really important. So I've been looking really with great interest over at Squarespace because I'm due for a refresh, and everything I've seen over there so far looks really pretty awesome. Designer templates, loads of choices. So I think whatever your style, whatever your creative kind of vision, there's going to be something that suits your work and shows it off really well. You can just sort of log in, you don't need to install anything, so no patches or upgrades ever required. 24/7 award-winning customer service. For some of you, if you want to sell your artwork or whatever it is you want to sell, then you can create online stores there as well. So if you want to head over to Squarespace for a free trial, and when you're ready to go and launch, you can go to the link that's down in the description and you can save 10% off your first purchase. Okay, hope you've enjoyed this week's video. I shall catch you back here very soon.